Hello and welcome to the Global Network on Sustainability in Space's first webinar of 2023. Today we're focusing on the topic of space standards and agreements and how those working groups and committees work and how the academic and industrial community can get involved in informing them. For those of you who don't know about the Global Network on Sustainability in Space, we're a network across academia and industry, funded over the last few years by the Science Technology Facilities Council in the UK, although our membership is a global membership of over 600 people and organizations now across many, many countries. It's very timely for us to be having this discussion now with the recent publication of the latest Interagency Space Debris Committee Coordination Committee report, which I'll just tell you observes that, I had it here a moment ago, that the post-mission disposal compliance remains low with the IADC's recommendations to mitigate and minimize space debris issues. And it's saying that given the evolution of the environment, it identifies that a doubling of the space debris population may occur within 25 years and an increase of 10 times over the longer term due to an increasing rate of catastrophic collisions. Critically, even in the case of no further launches into orbit, it's expected that collisions amongst existing space debris objects will lead to further growth in the space debris population. And I know many of the people attending today are trying to work on that problem of existing space debris objects. But it is not just, it's not just debris that we need to be concerned about in terms of sustainability of the space environment. It's also the behaviors and the growth of the commercial space sector and the behaviors of all the players in space. And again, we are fortunate that the open-ended working group on reducing space threats through norms, rules, and principles of responsible behavior has recently held its third session in Geneva, where I noted that there was a lot of discussion of the need for transparency and information sharing to protect the safe operating environment of space. We are very lucky today to have three experts to speak to us about all of these working groups and committees and initiatives. We're joined by Andrew Radcliffe. I'll let them put their video on and have a wave. He is the chief engineer and the lead of the Office of Chief Engineer at the UK Space Agency. We're also joined by Clive Hughes, who is the head of space security and advanced threats at the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And we're also joined by Joanne Wheeler, who is the managing director of Alden Legal and the chair of the Satellite Finance Network, and all three of whom are very deeply involved in this subject. So it's great to have them to share their knowledge with us today. But I want this to be an open conversation and definitely invite questions from the attendees. And please use the chat function to introduce yourself, to join in the discussion amongst yourself. Be aware that the panelists might not be following the chat, so don't assume that your remarks will be seen. If you want to ask a question of the panelists, then I'll ask you to use the reaction button on your screen and raise your virtual hand, and I will try and make sure that I can get to as many attendees as possible to take those questions. And my plea is, if you're not actually speaking, please mute your microphones. It's actually nothing worse than listening to someone else's background noise when you're trying to pay attention to a discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the virtual mic over to Andrew to update us on all of the activities that you as an agency have been involved in. Many thanks.
Great, thanks, Catherine. So just sharing my screen. So Catherine, can you just confirm you can see my slides?
We can see your slides.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So yeah, no, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. So for those who I've not met, my name is Andrew Ratcliffe. I'm Chief Engineer at the UK Space Agency. I lead our engineering team at the agency. So we provide technical oversight and assurance to a wide variety of programs that are performed by the agency, from launch to some of the activities that I'll mention here today. So what I intend to do is just give a bit of background in terms of UK Space Agency's activities on space sustainability, and then look at two particular forums that the agency are involved with. So this would be UN COPIUS, so the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, one of the subcommittees, the Science and Technical Subcommittee. I'll mention some of the activities ongoing there. And then I'll look at the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee, the IADC, which Catherine briefly mentioned, one of the recent outputs of that group. So in terms of space sustainability at the UK Space Agency, so sustainability has been identified as one of the key priorities within the agency. You may have seen our recently our corporate plan that was released, and you'll see within that space sustainability is one of the core 8, and that really defines the budget for the agency, where our budget goes, and then also the associated program plans. Within the sustainability area, there's essentially 4 main levers that the agency uses to try and work through the challenge of space sustainability and safety. So this would be mitigation, so not creating new debris, and this involves everything from mission design to new technologies to support end-of-life activities. Prevention, so avoiding predictable collisions. So this links to some of the work the agency is doing on space surveillance and tracking. Remediation, so removing key objects from orbit, and this links to some of our ongoing activities in active debris removal. But then core to all of that and linking them all together is our work on national regulations, and then also associated best practice within the forums that I'll mention. To give you a bit of context, so within the UK launch and orbital activities are licensed by the Civil Aviation Authority, so the spaceflight regulator within the Civil Aviation Authority. And then within the agency, we have a role in developing regulatory policy. And really that need to drive some of the regulatory policy is the reason that we're involved in forums such as UN COPIUS and the Science and Technical Subcommittee, and then the IADC, both to inform our ongoing research, our ongoing policy development, but also to ensure coherence across the agencies and share best practice and ongoing research. So jumping into 2 of these activities then. So the first one that I wanted to flag to this group was UN COPIUS, the Science and Technical Subcommittee. So for those who are not aware, there is the major committee, the COPIUS committee, and then the 2 subcommittees, the Science and Technical Subcommittee, and then LSC, the Legal Subcommittee. And this consists of over 100 member states from across the globe and over 50 permanent observers. And within STSC, the role really is to discuss and share science and technical activities, technical aspects of space activities, whether that be launch, space weather, or nuclear power sources. So one of the major outputs of the committee in recent years has been something called the long-term sustainability guidelines, and these are related to the sustainability of future outer space activities. So in 2018, the working group that was brought together around LTS released 21 agreed guidelines, and essentially these were grouped. These were to try and inform member states of COPIUS and others and operators on best practice through their national regulation, through safety of space operations, through international cooperation and future research around how they could gear their national activities towards ensuring space sustainability. So some of the topics that you can see within the 21 guidelines include how should national regulators perform supervision of the space activities. So what would be good practice and what should be considered. Looking at registration practices. So what are the considerations when member states look to register their satellites with the UN. It then moves into safety of space operations. So this is looking at everything from approaches to sharing contact information through to conjunction assessments of satellites and for pre-launch activities. And then importantly, looking at capacity building efforts. So how do we improve the capabilities of emerging space nations and share experience? And then also what are the topics for future technical research that could be done collaboratively or individually, and what would be topics of interest? So these 21 guidelines exist. You can download them from the UN COPIUS website, and really to provide a body of information to try and guide practices in this area. So the working group has now moved into its second phase. So a new working group was established in 2022, and essentially the working group has a mandate to focus on 3 key areas. And that looks at challenges with the existing guidelines. So what are the elements that weren't predicted in the guidelines, and how could we work further, and possible new guideline areas. Sharing our experiences, practices and lessons learned from the voluntary implementation of the guidelines. So as we implement the guidelines, what can we do in terms of sharing best practice with others in implementation? And then also raising awareness and capacity building. So there's working groups that are working through these 3 key areas at the moment and capturing activity. So that's one of the areas that the agency is involved in alongside colleagues at the FCDO and across government. The next one that I wanted to flag was the IADC, and this is a group that I head the UK delegation of and work with others within the UK community to provide the UK input into the IADC. So for those who are not aware, the IADC is the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee. It's comprised of 13 member organisations. It was actually founded in 1993, and the BNSC, the predecessor to the UK Space Agency, joined in 1996. The IADC itself is space agencies or authorised governmental or intergovernmental entities which are carrying out space activities, and this ranges from manufacturing or operating spacecraft. But importantly, all member agency or all member organisations are actively undertaking space debris research, and that's so that the members actually can actively contribute to the ongoing work of the committee. And the purpose itself is to exchange information on space debris research, so we can coordinate our research individually, to then facilitate opportunities, so the working groups, which I'll mention in a minute, can work together, and international experts through the member organisations can perform joint research to then review the progress. And then on some of the core outputs of this is to identify debris mitigation options. So whether that's mission profiles or approaches through to some of the core products, which I'll mention shortly. So in terms of the IADC itself, it consists of a steering group, which I sit on, and then 4 working groups across various disciplines, from measurements to mitigation. And I'll give you a little bit more detail on that shortly. And then the IADC itself, we meet annually. The meeting's hosted by the chair, and it's by the chair in their location. And then there's a series of intersessional meetings by working groups to coordinate activities. So in terms of those working groups, and this is where essentially the core work of the IADC is performed. This happens across 4 key working groups. So working group 1 focuses on measurements. So this is techniques and processes and new sensor developments from radar to infrared. And associated with it is various working items to use these sensors collaboratively and individually to inform our overall capability. The next one is working group 2, and this focuses on the environment and databases. So this is the characterization and modeling of the debris environment. And looked at everything from updating debris models to short and long-term evolution of the environment, collision prediction and risk assessment. So this, the working group really focuses on the modeling and the capabilities to assess the environment. Working group 3 focuses on protection. So this is really the shielding techniques we have on our spacecraft. And then also looks at the ground facilities that we can use and the model and the simulation to assess the effectiveness of those shielding approaches, both existing and new. And then finally, we have working group 4, which focuses on mitigation. So what are approaches to reduce the hazards from space debris? And one of the key outcomes of the mitigation group is the space debris mitigation guidelines, which you hopefully are familiar with. So just in terms of the outputs from the IADC, so activities from the IADC essentially tasks through action items and internal tasks. So these action items and internal tasks guide the working groups and the various member organisations at the kickoff of these tasks, identify which areas they can contribute to, and a work plan is drawn up. There's also broader activities at the IADC, such as our annual re-entry prediction campaigns. So this is where member organisations come together and perform campaigns to monitor the re-entry of certain objects. So 28 of these have been performed since 1998 and range from the Long March 5B called stage recently to Starlink. And this is really to improve the overall capability of the member organisations and refine some of the models. And then the outputs range from some of our core products, which I hope you've seen the IADC Space Debris Mitigation Guidelines, which gives insight into approaches to post-mission disposal and failure rates of spacecraft to try and reduce the impact of space operations on orbit. And then the supporting document to that, which provides a bit more detail. And then also the IADC statement on large constellations, which provides insight into approaches to deploying constellations on orbit. And then more recently, as Catherine mentioned, the IADC also released the IADC report on the status of space environment. This looks at the current environment, so compliance to the space debris mitigation guidelines, but then also looks forward. So what is the forecasted environment? And is meant to be a document to really start or ignite the conversation on what is a sustainable space environment. What would that look like, and what are we working towards given our current compliance rates and the debris mitigation approaches. So on my last slide, I just wanted to flag the UKSA's, the UK's involvement in IADC. So as I mentioned, the UKSA leads the UK delegation at the IADC, and it's comprised of UKSA, Civil Aviation Authority, and academia at the moment within the group. All working across the various working groups, and we provide inputs into the various action items and internal tasks mentioned. Purposely, there's limited industry involvement. This is really to avoid any conflicts of interest. But one of the things that within the UK I've been considering is whether there's a need for a community of interest. So to publicise some of the IADC activities, but then also use it as a bit of horizon scanning to understand what is being done within, what are the emerging technologies and approaches that have been used by industry or new upcoming missions. In the future, I recognise that that there's growing interest, obviously, with groups such as Gnosis, in research interests and capabilities at UK institutions within space debris research. So I'm really seeking to grow the UK team to capitalise on some of these synergies, whether that's on the modelling, the facilities, capabilities that are emerging. The benefits of being involved in the IADC will it will provide a greater contribution to UK contribution to the IADC activities, and hopefully acts as a catalyst to initiate broader collaboration opportunities between UK participants and IADC members. So to enable this, one of the approaches I've used, my team and I have used so far, we kicked off a UKSA review of academic research interest and capabilities at the end of last year. The review of that information, thank you to those, if anybody's on this webinar, I contribute to that. Thank you very much. We're still working through that information, and we're looking to set up some one-to-ones and a workshop with interested parties within the current months. But then also, if through this presentation, and particularly on the IADC, if you or your institution missed the initial call and the initial survey, please do reach out to myself or one of my team, and then we'd be happy to include you in the review. So thank you very much. That's all I had today. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thanks, Andrew. That's great. That's good in-depth. I'm sure there will be people who want to see again the contact details in case they missed out the opportunity to feed into that review late last year. But first, let's go to Clive Hughes to update us on the open-ended working group and how that is going.
Bear with me while I share my screen.
Thanks, Clive. We can see your screen now. Great.
Right, okay, I think I'm ready. Yes. Firstly, thank you to Catherine and the Gnosis team for inviting me to this webinar to talk to you about space threats and its relation to the issue of sustainability, which I know is the core interest of Gnosis and its members. So, as already explained, my name is Clive Hughes. I'm the head of Space Security and Advanced Threats at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. The primary purpose of my role is to work to address or mitigate hostile threats to space systems using diplomatic means. One of the things that we're doing to address hostile threats is seeking to agree new norms, rules, and principles of responsible behaviours through the UN. And that's what I will focus on in this presentation. And in doing so, I'd like to demonstrate a couple of things. Firstly, how tackling space threats, hostile threats, can support the sustainability agenda for space. And conversely, how tackling space sustainability issues is also helpful in addressing the threat situation. And so that's why I'm pleased to be speaking alongside Adi Ratcliffe from the UK Space Agency, because in many respects we're sort of different sides of the same coin in this. I don't have very many exciting images in this presentation, I'm afraid. As diplomats, we tend to sit around in rooms talking. It's difficult to sort of capture the sort of simmering tensions on camera, but hopefully what I have to say will have been interesting nonetheless. So our starting point really is the integrated review, which the government published in March 2021, setting out our approach to security and foreign policy. And in that, it sort of recognized the importance of space. The review recognized that space will be a domain of increasing opportunity as the application of novel space technologies enables new economic and social possibilities. But it also acknowledged that increasing commercial and military use of space will make it an important sphere of competition, and that there will be considerable risks to strategic stability if this is not managed and regulated effectively. So one of the areas we need to manage in space is the development and use of capabilities to threaten space systems, especially given their high dependency on them. So what are the threats we are concerned about? So as members of Gnosis, you will all be well aware that space systems are highly complex. They are composed of satellites, ground equipment, the signals that flow between them, and they deliver a wide range of essential services for military and civilian users. And as a result, the threats against space systems are similarly complex. They encompass a wide range of capabilities that can deliver a wide range of effects in space, on the ground, and against the signals. They can be targeted and reversible, or they can be severe, having a wide impacts, and be irreversible. So there is a wide scale of threats and effects there. So for some capabilities, for example, cyber, but not only cyber, it can be really difficult to attribute an instance of interference or attack to a specific threat actor. So it isn't always clear cut what or who you're dealing with in terms of space threats. So this complexity, this ambiguity associated with space threats means that there's a risk that states misunderstand each other's intentions, miscalculate their responses to each other, and enter into a cycle of unmanaged escalation and potentially into conflict. And this is the key point, really, I'd like you to bear in mind. It's this kind of risk of miscalculation and enter into conflict is what we're trying to, is the key problem we want to address through this norms of responsible behaviors that we have mentioned. So one of the things about space systems is that it's often said that they're dual use, can be used for civilian and military applications. And this makes it difficult to distinguish between a threatening capability or a benign civilian one. And in many ways, the threats really emerge from the intent of the user of the system rather than the nature of the system itself. And this dual use nature of space systems makes it difficult to address threats through simple rules or bans on prohibitions on certain capabilities, because those capabilities may have useful civilian functions. So that's why we've established the Responsible Space Behaviors Initiative, which focuses on the use of capabilities, and which I will now talk about in a little bit more detail. So in 2020, the UK submitted a resolution to the UN General Assembly, and it commissioned the Secretary General to write a report based on the contributions of member states about the possibility of reducing threats to space systems through norms, rules, and principles of responsible behaviours. The Secretary General duly wrote that report. We made our own contribution, as did many other member states, and recommended that member states take the ideas contained in the report and establish an inclusive process to have further discussions. So the UK, continuing to show leadership on this, presented another resolution in 2021 to the General Assembly and established a UN open-ended working group on space threats to address space threats through norms, rules, and principles of responsible behaviours. So the UN open-ended working group began its work in 2022 last year. So its mandate is really split into 4 parts. Its first task was to take stock of the existing international legal and other normative frameworks concerning threats arising from state behaviours with respect to outer space. And this it discussed in the first meeting in May 2022. Then in September last year, it went on to the second part of its mandate and discussed current and future threats by states to space systems. And then the third meeting, which took place in February, just a couple of weeks ago, what is the key meeting really, because this was the meeting where it was addressing the third element of its mandate, which is to make recommendations on possible norms, rules, and principles of responsible behaviours relating to threats by states to space systems. And the UK, we made our own proposals there, as did many other states. So there's a lot of proposals now on the table, and these can all be found on the Open-Ended Working Group website. And the fourth meeting will take place in August this year. And this meeting will be trying to sort of take stock of everything that was said in the third meetings, make a record of that, and try and agree some recommendations for submission to the UN General Assembly in autumn of this year. So we've got this one more meeting to go in August. So how does it all relate to the sustainability issue? So at the third meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group, there was quite a heavy focus actually by states on space debris or actions that could create space debris. So I've just put a few quotes here from proposals made by some states. This isn't a full account of all the proposals made, just a selection. And you can see here, Australia, states should commit not to conduct destructive direct ascent anti-satellite missile testing. So this, in fact, is already set out in a UN General Assembly resolution, which was adopted last year and was voted in favour by 155 countries. Now, the UK underneath there has proposed at this open-ended working group that we even go a step further and say states should not destructively test their counter-space capabilities in space, which potentially brings in not just the direct ascent anti-satellite missiles, but other co-orbital or other capabilities. So we're suggesting we go a bit wider. And you can see that Canada there has made a suggestion that states should refrain from actions that deliberately cause physical damage or the destruction of space objects, resulting in the generation of long-lived debris. And here you can see they've actually mentioned the idea of debris, although they haven't mentioned counter-space capabilities or missiles like we have in the UK and Australian proposals, where we've tried to restrict it to the actual threatening capability. And then the Germany, Philippines, and Nigeria states should not test or use or threaten to use co-orbital kinetic counter-space capabilities against satellites and other space systems. So here you see it's focused on co-orbital capabilities. And then Brazil is at the higher end of ambition and is actually proposing that there should be an actual prohibition on the use of destructive ASATs, even in conflict. So there's a lot of proposals put forward and a big focus on the space environment. So the UK presented a working paper at Open-Ended Working Group 3 with seven proposals for new norms, rules, and principles of responsible behaviour. Number 2 you've already seen on the previous slide. But I just wanted to go through these just to show that how they relate to sustainability. So, for example, number 3 also, where we say states should ensure satellites under their jurisdiction and control or operating on their behalf do not conduct counter-space testing activities that impair the safe operation of satellites under the jurisdiction and control of another state. So again, this, if we were to agree to adopt such a norm, it would be beneficial for sustainability by avoiding sort of dangerous counter-space testing practices. Number 4 here, states should ensure satellites under their jurisdiction and control or operating on their behalf do not physically connect with satellites under the jurisdiction and control of another state without prior consultation and consent. So here we're talking about non-consensual rendezvous operations, which of course, if they were to occur, carry a risk accidents and therefore debris generation. So if we can agree norms related to space threats, it does have these benefits for the space environment. And I think there is a sort of indirect benefit as well, because as I mentioned earlier, our key objective with all this is to kind of have norms that help us avoid getting into misunderstandings and miscalculations and avoiding conflict, because conflict, if it does occur, would be likely to take place across the ground, sea, air, space, and cyber, so across domains, and would likely have potential impacts on the space environment if kinetic or destructive effects are deployed. So dealing with space threats is, I think, important for the sustainability agenda. And just finally, what are the next steps for us? So we've got the 4th meeting, as I mentioned, in September, where we'll be negotiating the report. If we can achieve consensus there, this report should be submitted to the UN General Assembly. And the intention of the UK is that we will submit another resolution this year, hopefully welcoming the report and hopefully being able to point to some new norms, rules and principles of responsible behaviour. However, I should stress that it will be difficult to achieve consensus. It's by no means guaranteed, and the debate on space threats is very polarised, with a range of views amongst states, and we can get into that in questions if you wish. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is that Russia, through one of its resolutions last year, has established a UN group of governmental experts to discuss legally binding proposals to prevent an arms race in outer space. And this will meet in November and also in 2024. So that's another process that's been established with which we will need to engage with as the UK government on space threats. So those are the sort of key issues coming up for us, which we will need to prepare for. So I will leave it at that, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Clive. That's been very interesting for me and others who may not have been as close to how these UN working groups work. I'm sure there will be lots of questions about how subject matter experts can get involved and support the UK delegation. And we'll come back to that. If nobody asks it from the attendees, then be ready for me to ask that question. But first, I would like to turn to Joanne Wheeler. Hi, Joanne, thanks very much for joining us. This is a slightly different topic because this is a hot off the press, emerging initiative, which may someday be a global working group, along these lines. But it's something that I think our members and the attendees today would be very interested in hearing about. So over to you, Joanne. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and really appreciate the invite today. So thank you to Gnosis and Catherine.
And I'll just share your slides too.
You're a star. Thank you very much. And thank you to Andrew and Clive. Catherine's already given a brief introduction to me, but I've been also involved in British Standards Institute work for just over 20 years and used to lead from the legal perspective the space sustainability work for European Space Agency. And if we can jump ahead, Catherine, but maybe I should just pause there about BSI, British Standards Institute. It has been almost the same group that I've been liaising with for most of that 20 years. And to answer your question there, Catherine, as to how can others be involved, I would strongly suggest that academics and industry members really do contact BSI and get involved in panel 9 in regard to space debris. I'm happy to make any introductions, so please reach out to me if that's helpful. But I would strongly encourage involvement, particularly for SMEs, LEO operators, LEO operators and constellation operators. If you can jump ahead, Catherine, and thank you very much for sharing the slides. So the concept of a space sustainability mark, or kite mark, but I use that very carefully, has been in the process of being considered, been discussing this with the Space Agency for about 4 years. But the catalyst came where Minister George Freeman at the Space Sustainability Summit last June announced a package for a plan for space sustainability that we've just heard from Andrew, but also that there was the intention to create a standard that would encourage companies, along with investors and insurers, to adopt best practices. And I'll discuss shortly where this idea also initiated from. And the announcement catalyzed the Earth and Space Sustainability Initiative, bringing together industry, academia, investors, insurance, government stakeholders, and international bodies to work together to try and ensure that space continues to support the environmental, economic, scientific interests of future generations. I like the concept of the generations unborn. And link this very closely to ESG standards that we are constantly hearing about nowadays. Catherine, if we jump onto the next slide, please. And the concept here is that the UK can lead the establishment of a global, transparent ESG space sustainability standard. And there's an opportunity here. In fact, when I've spoken to several other governments, they say, actually, we would like a government to take the, control of this. And we've seen quite a few recent actions from the US, for example. But the UK has an opportunity to be the world leader in forming such a mark for the sustainable use of space, covering the life cycle of the satellite and increasingly issues of dark and quiet skies. And there's been an excellent conference on that recently. And the work, and one thing that excites the Minister in this regard, the work can harness the existing world-leading expertise across the UK industry and academia and the experience of the UK finance and insurance industry. Now, background to this is really looking at how we encourage the implementation of existing space sustainability measures, or what are the space sustainability measures, bearing in mind that presently they really are voluntary at international level and might be called into contracts, called into licensing, called into procurement contracts from governments, but primarily, and it's interesting to hear what Clive was saying, slow development of binding standards. And I've sat at the legal subcommittee where there's occasional push for binding standards, but still a lot of work needing done on the technical side. So how do we make space sustainability standards implementable? And the idea was to link this to, number one, the raising of investment, unlocking ESG assets and investment. Speaking to the insurance community, allowing a better insurance risk. And here's a really important issue, availability of insurance. So I've been looking at this area, and Swiss Re, AIG, Aspen Re, and AGCS have all pulled out the space insurance market recently. The key issue here is while premia are low, and there's a low frequency of demand in LEO, and I'll come to that, the risk exposure is increasingly difficult to quantify. In LEO last year, according to the underwriters, 6,100 satellites were in LEO. Only 63 were insured for $3.1 billion. And space insurers are increasingly concerned about the potential increasing risk of collisions, of course, with a number of small satellites, and actually questioning the next 3 to 5 years whether there can be a sustainable LEO insurance market. And the underwriters have quoted to me that what they require is, number one, good data sources, but also to ensure that their underwriting is profitable, they need to see the reliability of the equipment, the reliability of satellites being launched, and how do they look at what is and is not reliable. And there are several ways to achieve these outcomes, but the most efficient way that the insurers are considering at the moment is space sustainability standards and this mark. Linked also to that is market access through other countries, and we're seeing that become more of an issue, and we're seeing some of the operators who have left the UK for some reason, usually Spectrum, I have to say, are coming back to the UK to license because the UK are taking the space sustainability aspect seriously. And then looking at how space sustainability standards can best be locked into licensing and regulatory activities and regulatory requirements. And also whether this mark could also help CAA quantify what is ALARP, as low as reasonably practical. And then it also just comes to reputation recognition of the companies, but also the regulators. So it is hoped that this concept of the mark will provide transparency and confidence to investors and add to the regulatory and international reputation of the UK and regulatory diplomacy. If we can jump ahead, Catherine, thank you. So achievements since that announcement in June of last year is Lloyd's of London have endorsed this concept, bearing in mind what I've just said about the potential uninsurability of the LEO environment. And they're positively backing this, which is excellent. Collaboration has now been discussed with British Standards Institute, NPL, UK Space Agency, and this isn't spelling UK Space Agency wrong, UK Accreditation Service, MTC, etc. I would very much like, and one reason I was very keen to do this presentation is to have a more structured discussion with Gnosis as to using and harnessing Gnosis's expertise in this work. Also, collaboration and cooperation has been offered by the US, Australia, Switzerland, Liechtenstein now, the Dutch government in addition, African governments, and many of them are coming to us rather than us going out. UNIDIR, who we're hoping will host 2 workshops, and many industry members, and we have several of them on this call, recognizing the importance to them and also the expertise that they can bring. Investors, and there's quite a few other investors, universities, but really it would be great to engage with yourself, Catherine, and the Gnosis network. We can jump ahead. No prizes for reading this with magnifying glasses at the moment, but hopefully these can be shared. This is a breakdown of how the initiative will move forward. Let me caveat with, this has not quite started yet. I will have another discussion with the Space Agency this afternoon to propose a quick way of starting this, because the Minister has now announced that the first report will be available in May, and the further reports will be available in September, October of this year. There needs to be a concrete review of existing standards, guidelines, gap analysis, what is and is not working, what is fit for purpose. Gap analysis doesn't mean that we need new standards. We need to look at what is working, what is not working, bearing in mind an outcome-based approach, an anticipatory approach. Looking also at geopolitics, insurance, finance analysis, etc. Engagement with people like Andrew and Clive already, and other governments and regulators. The work is then divided into these 14 boxes, and we already have quite a few industry volunteers who are putting up their hand, seeking to lead or be involved in some of these boxes, also academic leads. If we can jump ahead again, please. The work has slowly started, but this is very much on a pro bono and ad hoc basis at the moment with the British Standards Institute to look at this gap analysis of current standards, highlighting key priorities for the UK Space Agency at the moment is constellations, active debris removal, in-orbit servicing and Earth monitoring, and look at where the gaps are in existing standards, particularly where we may have rejected standards, how we can best use these to move forward. There is a lot of work needed here, and realistic timetables do need to be put in place. And this is also where we need the help of the experts on this call and within this network. And Catherine, just the next slide, please. So the next stages, and we're now hoping to start this in the next couple of weeks, not months, but weeks, because we really had hoped to start this in January, is to put the governance structure in place to make sure that the institute in this work is itself sustainable. A hub and spoke model where the hub will be the University of Leicester and Space Park Leicester, and the spokes going out to expertise, including various other governments, as I've mentioned, regulators, MIT, University of Leiden, etc. It's important to have that international engagement. As I've said, identifying gaps, undertaking that analysis, but also identifying collaborative programs with the space industry, those who are actually implementing this in practice, making sure that this is aligned too with the CAA. So conversations have been had with the CAA and Space Agency every week, in fact, for the past 18 months to really look at how we can make sure this is implementable and also fits on to the work that Andrew has also just mentioned from the Space Agency. Communications are very important, and 3 lines of communications will be also kicked off. One at industry level, one at, quite honestly, the man on the street, and the second one at government and international engagement level. to build up trust and confidence. And already speaking to DSIT about that. And then just lastly, Catherine, the last slide, we have a king who remains interested in sustainability aspects and remains interested in space sustainability aspects. And I have to say, I think we're lucky to have that. And this is his quote: "We must develop a sustainable way, a durable way of benefiting from space, just as we must here on Earth." And George Freeman, who, as you'll see, has made many announcements already of this space sustainability mark. With London as a global capital of insurance and venture financing, we have an opportunity to use our historic role in space science to now harness responsible finance for sustainable space. And just in short, so this work is now about to kick off in a matter of weeks, and it'd be great to have your engagement. And I would encourage everyone also to engage with British Standards Institute. Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanne. That was a quick romp through a lot of work I know has gone in to date. I'm just going to ask Clive and Andy to open their mics and come back on screen, and throw open to questions actually from attendees. I see that Leslie Ann had a question. Did you want to? You didn't put your hand up, but that's fine. Do you want to put your mic and camera on and ask that directly, Leslie Ann?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Lovely, okay, just trying to get my mic sorted out for you. Trying to get away from the...
Do you want to just a quick introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you very much. Clive, thank you very much for your presentation. My ears pricked up with both sides of the same coins. And I'm interested in cybersecurity by design. And I work with CDDO, the Central Digital and Data Office, in the Securing Government Services Department for Cabinet Office. And I'd like to ask you, does the FCDO cybersecurity have intentions to overlay the UK Space Agency's wheel model that was presented earlier?
Can I ask what you mean by overlay first, please? Sorry.
Sure. I wondered if it is it's part of the same move in the direction for security by design. So the UK Space Agency has the wheel of assurance for building spacecraft, and I wondered if that included cybersecurity.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, Andy may be better placed to answer.
I was going to say we might need to bring Andy in on that as well.
Yeah, but I mean, so like from the FCDO, we do have a cyber security team, but they're mainly focused on similar to what I'm doing, but in a cyber context, developing global norms of responsible behavior for cyber to address cyber threats. And of course, hostile cyber threats is maybe one of the risks that might, apply to space systems, including launch systems. And so I guess they're having a role in that sense. But I'm probably not close enough to the detail to sort of get into the nitty gritty of your answer. But Andy may be able to say a bit more on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Clive. So I think there's probably three elements to it. So if on the slide, I obviously showed a diagram showing the four levers that essentially can be used for safety and sustainability. For that one specifically, it was really to illustrate that essentially there are multiple approaches to ensuring that there's that we can guarantee safety of our space operations, and we can work towards sustainability. So we think a lot about mitigation, so space debris mitigation, so at end of life and through mission design, and that is one of the strongest approaches, and has been shown by IADC and others that implementing appropriate space mitigation, space debris mitigation approaches can try and drive down the amount of debris that's in the environment, and is one of the most effective tools. But it's also considering that alongside prevention, so assessing the objects on orbit, and then remediation, and then all bound together by the sort of national standards and regulatory elements. In terms of the cybersecurity elements, I think there's two aspects to it. So there's the standards by which spacecraft are designed. So in Europe, we have ECSS, and essentially these are a set of standards that are used by manufacturers to ensure that the products that they're delivering are going to survive the space environment. And these standards exist across all the various areas, from how to design a propulsion system to the project management of the projects. I have to admit, cybersecurity is not my specific forte, so I'm not sure if there are specific ECSS standards on cybersecurity. But I would expect there's something maybe in the ISO arena or BSI that Catherine mentioned that would be on that front. In terms of the spacecraft that are launched from the UK, or spacecraft that are licensed from the UK, that's performed by the Civil Aviation Authority. And as part of their licensing approach, they actually look across the operations and all the way through to the design elements of those spacecrafts. And I know that cybersecurity is one of their considerations, and they do that alongside other governmental departments to ensure that they're adopting the most up-to-date standards. So hopefully that addresses at least partially your question.
Super, thank you. And you mentioned the ISO. Yes, you're absolutely right. There's an imminent 2022 ISO coming out for assurance as well.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks. I'm just conscious of the time, and a hand has just gone up. We have 2 minutes. Matthew, can you unmute and ask your question very, very quickly? You're still on mute.
Yeah, I'll just try and unmute. I just wanted to raise a thought that I had when we attended the UNIDIR meeting, Catherine. So I'm going to repeat it, and I'd like to hear what Clive has to say about this. So what's been talked about here is stopping the situation getting worse rather than remediating what is already there. What is already there is a hell of a mess that has been created not by private companies, but by a number of different governments over the years. And it's very large satellites, rocket bodies and so forth, uncontrolled potential source of future debris from uncontrolled resident space objects. So a thought occurred to me in the context of space security. Would an activity looking at removing large space objects in the UN context, the highest risk ones that are there, act as a kind of confidence building measure? Because some of the things you have to do are rendezvousing and perhaps managing other people's space debris rather than your own. And this could be a way of cleaning up the worst risk that is there, whilst also improving that confidence building and assuredness between states, because it is states that have created the problem in the first place.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I will just check, because we're on time now, whether Clive, Andy, and Joanne are able to stick around for a few extra minutes to take questions. Thank you very much. I think, Clive, that was directed at you.
Yes, but I think it's one where we'll need to bring in Andy again. But I think I could say, yes, it would be a good confidence building measure if we could achieve some sort of agreement to remove the most kind of worrisome objects in terms of debris creation. Of course, it's very difficult to reach agreement in the present circumstances on anything. But obviously that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I imagine this sort of thing has been discussed in the IADC and other places. I mean, it's not something that's come up particularly in the context of the UN open-ended working group, like we try to sort of limit it to, you know, on our side, proposals that are really addressing weapons systems or capabilities that could be used as weapons, even if they're not maybe actually weapons, you know, and addressing hostile intent. Whereas I would say this is more of a kind of safety, sustainability issue, more of a UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space issue. But there is that read across, as you say, to security, and it would be a good confidence building measure if we could sort of address that.
And
Andy might be able to say more about the practicalities of it.
I will ask Andy about that and a sort of international collaboration, confidence building initiative there. There's a related earlier question from Kit Lee, which was asking, is there an up-to-date agreed roadmap to remove volumes of space debris over time to safer levels? So it's a sort of related question there, Andy.
Yeah, no, thanks, Catherine, and thanks, Matthew, for the question. So in terms of the transparency elements, it's a good point. So obviously, Clive spoke to some of the security elements, but as you know, there's a number of missions that have historically been performed to test active debris removal technologies, and one element we try to do at the UN, at the SDSC, is to have technical presentations from those companies to really try and drive the transparency within these international fora, to ensure that member states are aware that the UK has funded or has licensed some of these activities. There's also industry groups such as Confers. One of the key elements within the guiding principles is around transparency. And that has obviously, you can infer security elements to it, but it also has a real practical safety element. If you're going to be performing safety critical operations within proximity of another operator, then best practice should be to inform them that you're going to do a propellant transfer operation that could lead to some sort of incident that needs to be mitigated. So transparency, is obviously a key element. Picking up on the question that Catherine identified, first part of it, I would probably say that quite a few national agencies have roadmaps towards developing active debris removal technologies and RPO technologies. And then in the context of Artemis, there is something called the Artemis Accords, which the US, NASA led on. And this looked at everything all the way through to space debris mitigation in sort of the lunar environment. So those discussions are ongoing.
Thanks, Andy. Joanne, did you want to add something? You're on mute, so.
Let's have if I come off. Can I just quickly add, I think, interesting question, and I think it's such an activity will build up trust and confidence measures if done properly. And let me just raise a few concerns here. Clive and Andy have both mentioned the need for consent and proper consultation. Then there's a need of, even if this measure is valuable and is a public good and serves an environmental and sustainable criteria, there's still a liability and responsibility issue. And especially when you have two conjoined items, who's responsible, who controls, what happens if they knock into something else? There's an issue of attachment of liability and responsibility, disattachment of these. And a couple of years ago, an ex-US astronaut had funding to deorbit a Russian Rosat satellite that was spewing out some nice nuclear fuel. And we had an interesting discussion with the US government. And while this would be environmentally an interesting thing to do, and it could serve a public good principle, the concept of consult and consultation, etc., made it very, very difficult, and the issue of causing additional damage. So yes, it's important for these activities for trust and confidence building measures, also linked to sustainability and security, but they must be done properly. And I very much take my hats off to Andrew and Clive and your colleagues for the UK leading the way at the UN in these aspects.
Yeah. Thanks, Joanne. So I am going to draw it to a close. I'm going to ask each of you one last question. You can answer very quickly, and then I will wrap up. So Clive, the open-ended working group includes, it's been designed to allow for participation of civil society. How can subject matter experts support the UK delegation and your representations there for the report that you're preparing for August?
Yes, well, that final meeting is going to be a bit of a negotiation, so I'm not sure that is the best moment to come in, but it'll be, hopefully we'll continue these discussions into the future. But I think with these UN meetings, they're open for other not just civil society. It is largely civil society, but there's no reason why industry, for example, couldn't have a stronger voice in these meetings, and I think that would be welcome, and I would encourage that. Perhaps even getting together as consortiums of interested parties, in order to make it an efficient intervention. You can submit working papers and make statements, so long as it's in an informal part of the meeting. There's obviously some UN procedures around this, which I won't go into detail.
But there's really nothing to stop people putting position papers into the process and sharing their insights and views.
Yes.
Okay.
And these are useful, and we do read them. So, right.
So I'd like to encourage that. And Andy, you talked about a review of the LTS guidelines. I think the world has changed quite a lot since 2018. Again, how can people who want to participate, support, feed in their expertise, how can they best do that?
Yeah, no, thanks, Catherine. So on the LTS, we regularly do reviews of UK implementation. So we regularly go out to operators and academics in the community to try and understand how they're implementing them locally. I'd say one area which people part of the Gnosis network could get involved with, particularly on the academic side, is the IADC. So we are, as I presented earlier, we've got a number of working groups focusing on measurements and environmental modelling, protection and mitigation. And there's a clear opportunity to engage more people from the UK community who have collaborative research interests in those areas. We've already got great support from certain institutions such as Southampton University and fantastic work that Hugh Lewis is doing. But I'd like to see sort of whether there's others within the UK who would like to contribute to this ongoing research. So if you're interested in participating within the IADC, you've got ongoing research that would contribute to the areas I've identified, please do reach out to myself, my team. As I mentioned, we're doing a review at the moment. I welcome more inputs into that. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. And you're on the UKSA website. Do you want to put your email in the chat function or a member of your team? That would be great. And Joanne, same question. How do people get involved in the ESSI initiative?
Quite honestly, contact me, and in the next few weeks, I'm hoping to reach out to many other people to actually start putting this in place. And I would also encourage people to join the British Standards Institute panel on space debris. But great. ESSI is going to move quickly in the next few weeks. Thank you.
Excellent. Catherine. So I hope that people have found that as instructive as I have, and it encourages more participation from the Gnosis community. I was just going to finish by, if I can find it, I'm terrible with the share screen. Tell you what we're up to next. Did that work? If people can see that. So our draft program is still a work in progress for 2023, but we are looking at workshops and sandpits events around processing techniques, around daytime observation, space-based IR and UV observations, and also relating to some of the conversation that we've had in this discussion, what are the requirements for space situational awareness in order to support space debris removal and the future markets for in-orbit servicing and manufacturing. If anybody has any other suggestions for topics they'd like to see the Gnosis network tackle in our knowledge sharing and our having our experts come to discuss with you, please do send them in through the website. And I would just say, by all means, please follow us on our social media channels. If you missed our annual conference last year, all of that material has now been uploaded to our Gnosis_Space YouTube channel, so you can catch up at your leisure, and this will also be uploaded there in due course. So it only leaves me to say thank you so much to Clive and Andy and Joanne for sharing what you're up to, and thanks to everybody for participating. And I hope to see you at the next Gnosis event. And Joanne, you and I will get a call in the diary to talk about how we can support what you're doing. Okay. Thanks everybody very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.